वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते 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 वासुदेवाय
Namaste, everyone. Welcome, everyone from around the world to this discussion on Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism, hosted by the Vedanta Life Academy. I am Swami Harinamanada. I'm speaking to you from the Sandiego Center, and we have a great program, so I hope you'll enjoy it. Now, it's traditional to begin with the chant. So let us invoke it, and if you know the chant, please chant along. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamaya Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamaya Havir Havir Maeti Rudrayate Dakshinam Bhukam Tena mam pahi nityam, tena mam pahi nityam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through, and guide us evermore with thy loving presence. Om peace, peace, peace to all beings everywhere. Welcome everybody to attending this great philosophical discussion. First of all, I want to say this is the first time that we're hosting such a program with this new type of software. And let me apologize in advance if there are any difficulties that do arise. If any difficulties do arise, just reset the YouTube and wait a couple minutes and we will be back. And another thing is that if you'd like to ask a question, I'm not guaranteeing we can put any questions, but if you'd like to ask a question, you can try putting it in the chat box and I'll try to see it maybe at the end of this program in the YouTube chat box. Now, the purpose of today's program is to understand these two great philosophical systems. You're going to hear about Advaita Vedanta and then be able to compare and contrast it with a philosophical system you're probably much less familiar with, which is Kashmir Shaivism or Tantra system. And you'll discover probably that many of your spiritual practices actually come from this tantric system, like mantra and worship. It's a robust philosophy, which some say, in many ways, really describes the experiences of saints and incarnations like Sri Ramakrishna and others. Now, today we're going to have really two spiritual heavyweights, two sadhakas and scholars who really know their field really well. In fact, they both know Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism. But this talk is not meant to show one defeating the other and declare a winner at the end of this. By the end of this talk, I hope that you'll be able to see that you can actually integrate both of these philosophical traditions into your everyday outlook and into your sadhana, your practices. Now, to help us understand these philosophies, we do have these two great eminent scholars and sadhakas. So let me introduce them. Our first speaker is Swami Sarvapriyananda, who's the minister and spiritual leader of the Vedanta Society in New York. He is a inaugural fellow for 2019-2020 at the Harvard Divinity School. Prior to this, he served as an assistant minister in the Vedanta Society. He's the minister and spiritual leader of the Vedanta Society of New York now. And prior to that, he served as the assistant minister in the Vedanta Society of Southern California for 13 months in 2015. Swami joined the Ramakrishna Math and Mission in 1994 and received his sannyas in 2004. Before being posted to the Vedanta Society in Hollywood, Swami served as an acharya of the Monastic Probationers Training Center at Bellarmont. And he was also vice principal of Deogar Vidyapit Higher Secondary School and many other positions. He is known as the YouTube Swami and is probably the most popular speaker in our Ramakrishna order. He has an innate capacity to take very difficult subjects and make them simple and comprehensible. And he is fun to listen to. And when you listen to him, you actually feel like you're learning something. Next, we have Dr. Sthaneshwar Timalsina. He is a professor of religious studies and philosophies at the Sandiego State University. He is from Nepal, which has been described by many as a place of Tantra. His learning and training in the knowledge of Tantra began with his father and then with other noted Sanskrit scholars. He went to Benares and studied Sanskrit. After receiving an MA in classical Indian philosophy, and particularly in yoga and tantra from the Sampurnananda Sanskrit University in Benares in 1991, he returned to Nepal and took a teaching position at Mahendra Sanskrit University. In 2005, he received his PhD from Martin Luther University in classical Indian philosophy with a focus on Advaita Vedanta in Germany. Dr. Timalsina is a prolific writer with 5 books and over 80 referred journal articles. But besides his scholarship, he's also a sadhaka, a keen seeker. He's been trained in the Vedas and Kali Krama by his father, and he has deepened his studies of Vedanta with Swami Ramananda and Tantric systems with Prema Chaitanya and many others. We welcome both of you so much for coming and being present here and giving us your knowledge and wisdom. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to have Swami Sarvapriyananda speak from the position of Advaita Vedanta, and Dr. Timalsina speak from the position of Kashmir Shaivism Tantra. Now, like I said, they're both well versed in both of these traditions, so they could speak on both of them. But so what we're going to do is, our plan is to go through the philosophy, then the practices, and then the experiences. And so what I'd like to do is allow each speaker about 7 minutes to introduce the philosophical structures of each of their systems. So I'd like to first have Swami Sarvapriyananda speak a little bit about the Advaitic Vedantic tradition. And I know there are some of you also who are, this is the first time you're getting introduced into the Advaita Vedanta tradition. So Swamiji, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. Namaskar to both Swami Harinamanada ji and Professor Sthaneshwar Timalsina. I was just saying before we started in the preparatory stage, when we were talking to each other in the backstage, I was saying that both of these positions, Advaita Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism, could have been very easily handled by Professor Sthaneshwar Timalsina. He is a leading authority on Advaita Vedanta philosophy and of course also on Kashmiri Shaivism. But strangely enough, to talk about non-dualism, it seems we need 2 people. So just to make it, just for the sake of fun, I think Swami Harinamanji has brought in 2 people to speak about non-dualism. And he has asked me to speak about Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta is, my job is a little easier than Professor Timalsina's job, because Advaita Vedanta is actually pretty easy to summarize in comparison to Kashmir Shaivism, which is a very intricate philosophy. Advaita Vedanta can be put in very few words. The famous formula given, usually given about Advaita Vedanta is Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya, Jiva Brahmaiva Napara. Brahman is the reality, world is an appearance, and you, the sentient being, the Jiva, is none other than Brahman. So if we just look at these 3 components, the Brahman is the ultimate reality, the world is an appearance, and the Jiva is none other than Brahman, we will get a pretty decent overview of Advaita Vedanta. So all of this comes from the Upanishads. These are the spiritual philosophical texts found in the Vedas, and the teachings of the Upanishads are called Vedanta. If you want a straight definition of Vedanta, Vedanta Nama Upanishad Pramanam. So this is the definition when beginners in Vedanta are asked to memorize. Vedanta is basically the source of spiritual knowledge called Upanishads. So these texts are Vedanta. Upanishads are Vedanta. What do the Upanishads teach? Multiple systems have developed out of these Upanishads based on the commentaries of great masters like Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Nimbarkacharya, Vallabhacharya, and so on. But what we are going to talk about today in this discussion, it is about Advaita Vedanta. So Upanishads, based on the interpretations, the commentaries of Adi Shankaracharya and his followers, in which line we also come as monks of the Ramakrishna order, Harinamananda ji and myself. Ultimate reality, Brahman. What does that mean? According to Advaita Vedanta, the ultimate reality of this universe is Brahman, which is existence, consciousness, bliss. Existence here does not mean things which exist. And normally, whenever we talk about existence, we think about things existing, tables and chairs and people, men and women and stars and quasars and quarks, the extremely tiny and the extraordinarily massive, whatever exists. These are things which exist. But now think of existence itself. A good example would be when you look out into the ocean, you see waves and bubbles, big waves and small waves and medium waves and bubbles and foam, all of that. But we know all of those are different forms of one substance, which is water. Exactly like that, uh, can we try to think of this entire universe which we are experiencing right now, all kinds of existing things? It could be a very gross physical thing like a table which exists, or it could be a little more abstract like a number that also exists in some sense, or like Harry Potter, a fictional entity that also exists in some fictional sense. All kinds of existing things, can you think of them like waves or foam or bubbles, and existence itself like the water? So or the gold and ornaments example, where the same gold is appearing as necklaces and bracelets and rings and so on and so forth. The substance itself is gold, the substance itself is water. Similarly, conceive of this entire universe which you are experiencing now as an ocean of existence, and all the existing things are like waves. Every entity, existing entity, is like a tiny wave. It's a form, a name, and an activity, but the substance, the reality, is existence. So this existence, this is called Sat in Advaita Vedanta. But it's not just a mere dead existence. It is also awareness, chit, consciousness. Again, we are using the English word consciousness deliberately so, because we really do not have an equivalent word for pure consciousness. It's Chaitanya. What do I mean by consciousness? Just as by existence or Sat, I do not mean a particular existing thing. Similarly, by consciousness, we do not mean particular conscious experiences, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, remembering, hating, loving, understanding. All of these are conscious experiences we have. Now think of consciousness as the background of all of them. It is one consciousness which appears as various conscious experiences, not particular conscious experiences, but the consciousness which is the background of all of them. That consciousness is called Chit. And in Advaita Vedanta, this Sat, existence, and this consciousness, Chit, they are one and the same thing. They are not two different things. And then this consciousness, this unlimited existence and this unlimited consciousness, this is itself Ananda, that is fulfillment. In all our life, we are looking for fulfillment, bliss, happiness. Only the thing is, we experience a series of individual joys and pleasures, and we keep trying to repeat that, and we keep trying to avoid pain. But underlying all of this is one unlimited joy or bliss, which is called Ananda. And this is the same thing as Sat and Chit. This is an unlimited, infinite existence consciousness, which in itself is Ananda. So this Sat Chit Ananda is the ultimate reality of the universe. What do I mean by ultimate reality? That brings us to what we normally consider as reality. This universe, the people, the laptop in front of you, the sky and the earth and all the events which are happening in the world, this is what we consider to be real. And this is where Advaita Vedanta says, you're mistaken. You're making a very big mistake. This is not ultimately real. Ultimately real is Brahman, existence, consciousness, bliss. And what we call real, the world, is an appearance. Appearance of what? Appearance of the same Brahman, existence, consciousness, bliss. Just as a rope is sometimes mistaken as a snake, In the semi-darkness, there's a rope there, and you go and see, and you think, oh, it's a snake. It's not a snake. Never was, not a snake now, never will be. But by error, it looks like a snake. Similarly, it is our mistake. It is our error which makes Brahman appear as this universe. We have no idea of what Brahman is. And this world itself, all the people and the objects and all the activities, this seems like reality. This world which seems like an external existing reality, and the underlying reality called Brahman is not evident to us. This experience we are having now, this is called Jagat Mithya, falsity of the world. The world, this is not how it is. It's like the illusory snake which is appearing on the real rope. The rope is appearing as the snake because of ignorance of the rope. Because we do not see the snake, we do not see the rope, we are making a mistake and thinking it's a snake. Similarly, because we do not realize it is Brahman, we are making a mistake and we are considering this to be an independently existing world out there. It is not so. It is false. An important concept in Advaita philosophy is falsity. Just as truth or reality is Brahman, similarly falsity, the falsity of the world has to be understood. Falsity does not mean that it does not exist at all. Since we are experiencing it, it has to be given some kind of existence, some kind of provisional existence. So you cannot say it does not exist because we experience this world. We are seeing it, hearing, smelling, tasting, all our activities, including our Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism, everything is going on in this world. So it has a kind of provisional existence. You cannot say it does not exist, but you cannot say it exists also in the sense of Brahman. If this is difficult to understand, think of an ornament, a necklace made of gold. Does the necklace exist by itself apart from gold? Is it a second reality, a reality in itself? No. The gold is the substance which appears as the necklace, which with a name and a form and an activity which you call the necklace. But the necklace does not have a separate existence of its own. But can you say the necklace does not exist at all? Then what is it that you're calling necklace? What is it that looks like that? What is it that you put on your neck? So the name and the form and the activity associated, nama, rupa, vyavahara, of the necklace is given a provisional kind of reality. It is called anirvachaniya. Anirvachaniya means cannot be expressed as ultimately real like Brahman, cannot be expressed as false, completely unreal. The world is like that. Now again, is the world like a snake seen in a rope? Is it like a dream, like a mirage? No. Advaita Vedanta makes a distinction between Paramarthika, Vyavaharika and Pratibhasika. So Paramarthika, ultimate reality, is Brahman, and the world of appearance is divided into two kinds. One is this world which we are so familiar with. This is called Vyavaharika, transactional or relative reality. And in this world itself, we have examples of errors and dreams and illusions. Snake in a rope, mirage, dream. These are called pratibhasika, errors, illusory appearances. So Advaita metaphysics makes a distinction between ultimate reality and the transactional or relative reality. And the relative reality again is divided into that which is transactional or relative, and also within that examples of error and dream and illusion. Now, all of this, so this is what is meant by Jagat Mithya, falsity of the world. Why does this happen? Because of something called Maya, which is neither ultimately real, nor totally unreal, which is constituted of Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, and ideas all taken from Sankhya philosophy and having their roots in the Upanishads also. And final point, what about us? What are we? Ultimately real or relatively real or false or what? We, by we I mean the jivas, the sentient beings, individual beings like us, human beings, animals, and all kinds of living creatures. We are actually, in reality, none other than Brahman. Jiva Brahmaiva Napara. So Advaita Vedanta is often summarized by the great sentences. Mahavakya, Tat Tvamasi, that thou art. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Prajnanam Brahma, This consciousness which we experience, this is in reality none other than Brahman. I am Atma Brahma. This very self is the ultimate reality, Brahman. What does that mean? It means that what we consider ourselves as individual little beings born and aging and dying and struggling in life, if we knew ourselves in reality, we would know that we are Brahman. This knowledge is the goal of Advaita Vedanta. It's the goal of human life according to Advaita Vedanta, to realize our identity as Brahman, as immortal, as in unlimited existence, as unlimited consciousness, as unlimited ananda or bliss. This Satchidananda is my real nature. I am Brahman. This has to be realized. How do we do that? Those are the practices which we will consider in a little subsequently, a little later discussion. But this is the sum and substance of Advaita Vedanta. One reality, Brahman. The world is an appearance. And what we consider ourselves to be, jivas, we are mistaken. We are actually none other than the absolute reality, Brahman. By realizing that, we overcome all sufferings, dukkha nivritti, and attain what we were always seeking, which is peace and blessedness, ananda prapti. Okay, that should cover it.
Swami Sarvapriyananda. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Timalsina to introduce us into the Kashmir Shaivism Tantra philosophy. Dr. Timalsina, thank you so much for coming.
Om Jayanti Jagadananda Vipakshakshapana Kshamaha Paramesha Mukhodbhuta Jnana Chandra Marichayaha. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really pleased to have this conversation with Swamiji and all the folks here. Listening to this conversation, there is not much left to say because I enjoy both the traditions, and for some folks, where is the loyalty? So for my own understanding is Advaita Vedanta is a pure description of the truth, and it's not about being a follower or having a loyalty to. It's just describing the facts. And so of course I agree with Swamiji, and just speaking from Kashmiri Shaivism, a general term given to describe a few of the systems. Actually, I'll just try to do my job within the given time. As Swamiji pointed out, that it's vast and there are so many different streams. Broadly speaking, when we say Tantra, we are speaking about 92 different agamas. There are 10 Shaiva agamas, 18 Raudra agamas, and 64 Bhairava agamas. These 10 agamas called Shaiva Siddhanta agamas are dualistic. 18 Raudra agamas are dualistic and non-dualistic, Veda Veda. And 64 Bhairava agamas are non-dualistic or monistic. But even within these 64 agamas, there are some secondary sets of agamas, making the literature broad. When we pick Kashmiri Shaivism, we are not only trying to read the gist of like the entire outcome of these agamic literature, we are also adding new philosophical innovations by seekers, philosophers like Vasugupta, Somananda, Kallata, Utpala, and of course Abhinavagupta, Kshemaraja, and Jayaratha. So to make it concise, I would have to just give you 4 or 5 points, and the first would be how it has been easy for me after listening to Swamiji. Is Swamiji pointed out there is this Sat, Chit, and Ananda, pure existence, pure consciousness, and pure bliss. In that, what the Trika system does is it takes advantage of most of the premises from within Advaita and then moves beyond. And we should not get confused that there is just only one way of looking into Advaita Vedanta. Actually, there are different ways of reading and interpreting the very discipline of Advaita. The same way, even in the Trika system and Spanda and Mahartha, there are different ways to understand, and philosophers have adopted very many ways to interpret these systems. So the first point would be starting from Sat, Chit and Ananda, which have been thoroughly explained by Swamiji. The way the philosophers here did in Tantra is Sat and Chit are anyway identical. So we are considering Chit as pure consciousness, but it is not to deny every single expression of the Chit. So every modification of the Chit retains the same self-luminous quality, and it's a spontaneity of effulgence of this consciousness to become the manifold, and therefore all our epistemic, all our cognitive modes are self-expression of this Chiti. That is the first point I would like to point out. And then comes Ananda, bliss. So yet again, in the sense of the bliss, what Vedanta stressed is not the way these objective joys or enjoyments come as a vishaya, the objects, but there is this basis for all the enjoyment, and that is the absolute. But what the Trika system does is takes advantage again of that Ananda as the foundation of being, expression, but takes it further, that every mode of expression, every mode of being, every mode of cognition has this bliss embedded within it, so much so that even Brahmananda becomes one of the categories of Ananda, and Jagadananda, like a all comprehensive bliss, becomes a category to incorporate, starting from the body to breathing to our cognitive faculties to different states of pranic and Kundalini, the surge of Kundalini. So all the modes of our being experience are embedded with this joy. It's just being itself, it's euphoric. Life is not miserable. Life has nothing to say this is all is suffering. It's even when we are suffering, there is some type of bliss in the foundation of this this being. Therefore, even the beings who are suffering do not want to terminate their life, because they are still seeking for some kind of bliss there. Or when we are suffering, the Trika Saivas interpret this as a dance of playing a bad role of suffering, not actually suffering in reality, because this is just the very expression of the divine consciousness. But then they add two additional categories of three additional categories of Ichha, Jnana and Kriya. First, identified Sat with the Chit, and so Chit and Ananda, we have three additional categories of Ichha, volition or will. So this is the pure will of Lord Shiva materialized in the manifold. And because I am Shiva, therefore even my will, my Ichha, has that same capacity. Yogiva nirupadanam arthajatam prakashayat chidatmai vahi devonta sthitam ichhavashad vahi. So this Ichha, will, is everywhere in every sentient being, the will to be, will to express, will to enjoy. And then when that will is somehow hindered, we feel sankuchita, conditioned, confined, and then unhappiness begins. And the whole world suffering is explained in this terminology of sankocha, sort of shrinking, being limited, not having the fullness of the will. And then the next category is jnana, cognition, of course. Even in there, the same sankocha are shrinking of unbound knowledge becomes limited, and we start knowing limited things. And then the same thing happens with kriya, the action, the power of action. And this power of action comes within us too, and that power of action also is limited, and we find ourselves shrunken into like a small worm, unable to move, unable to will, even unable to know. And this is what suffering is. But even in its most limited state, even in one insect, these 5 potentials are always there. Tathapi tadvat panchakrityani karoti. So the idea is that those divine aspects are always there, whether one is in this insect form or in the form of the creator of the world. With this premise, so I will introduce 3 or 4 categories, each relating to each of the schools. The first is the Kula Marga, because even within Tantra there are different schools, and I will not be doing the just if I only speak from the perspective of one. So from the perspective of Kula, they very much focus on embodied experiences. These are the Kaulas actually who develop the practice of Kundalini. So it's not in Patanjali or the Upanishads. We have to go to early Kaula Shastras, Yogi Kula, to understand the chakra system and the Kundalini. So now, you know, all the workshops, people are talking about Kundalini, starting even Western psychologist Carl Jung, discussing about these energies or Kundalini. So the first is how much within our own body we have infinite potentials, and we are able to somehow rekindle those energies by properly channeling not just our breath, but alongside the breath, what we call mantra, the speech, a purified vach, so which helps us to correct our own thinking patterns, thought systems, and that allows us to broaden the horizon of our consciousness. And so the idea is that human suffering or suffering of any person is the condition of incompleteness, and that comes not just by means of recognition of the world beyond or lokottara or transcending this reality, but that comes by very much engaging in the world, enjoying the world with the positive outlook, positive approach to our everyday life. From the Trika, I would just like to give one single terminology of aham, I am, that is phonetically and cosmically very significant, that every pulsating heart has this I am-ness. I am, I exist. So this sense of I am is an acronym from the Trika perspective of all the phonemes, because in Sanskrit A is the first phoneme and Ha is the last. So aha is, but ah is itself a joy of being. So this ananda expression, so in the very mode of I am, there is this aham, the expression of bliss embedded within, and this is what constitutes our presence in the world, not just a trap, but rather an expression of bliss and consciousness. So in that, we have multiple upayas. So rather than pure description of the truth, like when they say this is what it is, this is such and so, but how do you experience that? The entire focus of tantric systems is upaya shastra. This is the doctrine to teach people how to get to that pristine experience that has been described in the text. And there is not one upaya. It is not just about the truth and this is what it is, and then you have to somehow magically be there, but it's a systematically cultivating experience from the bottom to the top. And for some seekers, if they get instantaneously by the grace of the divine or by the grace of the teacher guru, then that is one type of samavesa, entry into the divine. And the other would be by contemplative practices, just a pure thinking, pure analytical thought without engaging anything external. And the third would be engaging all the external modes and successively, gradually, starting from uchara, articulation of the phonemes, and different gestures, let us say, or physical postures, meditating upon different images and visualization, and the thinking of different colors, or locating different images in different places, different centers of the body. So this is to cultivate different states of what we call Samavesa. They give all different systems, different modes of practices, because ultimately it is not about the description of the truth, but about the expression of what has been described. And so 2 small points next would be Krama and Spanda. They are very much interrelated. From the system of Krama, I would just like to add, I'm speaking with Swamiji from Ramakrishna order. As you know, Swami Ramakrishna was a great devotee of Mother Kali. So this Krama system is a development of the philosophy of Kali. And in this great philosophy, we find this successive emergence of the divine finding temporality and spatiality. That is, pure consciousness is not bound in any space and time, but it, with its own freedom, swatantra, it assumes the manifold, and in this manifold it expresses its dynamism, inherent dynamism, its ability to change. So basically the absolute is not necessarily changeless and always stale, and then all the changes are illusion. But actually what Abhinava Gupta even says, asthasya eka rupena babusha maheshwara maheshwaratam samvitam tad atyakshad ghatadivat. If the divine entity, the absolute, were to just stay motionlessly without change anything, it would be just like a pot. And what would it even mean to be conscious? So it's the centrality of swatantra is what is used, or swatantra means freedom. So this is by means of swatantra or freedom that these thinkers explain the world diversity, the manifold, and the oneness, the absolute, while one can be many, because out of its absolute freedom to unfold itself in as many ways as it likes. So what is the world and what is the absolute? What is the immanent being present in the world, into the manifold, and being one in the absolute form is, in their terminology, is purely unmesha and nimesha. When we close our eyes towards the world, there is this oneness revealed, and when the oneness is closed, the world is revealed. Consciousness is constantly revealing. Consciousness is constantly unfolding, enfolding. Consciousness is simultaneously manifold and one. When it is many, it does not transcend its own inherent unity, oneness. So we can find all these examples of similar examples of the bubbles and the waves, for example. So we do not need, in Vedanta, we generally find the attitude that to see the ocean, you generally have to not to see the tides. Basically, you focus on the oneness, the side of the ocean. But the Kashmiri Shaivism stressed that you can see the tides and the waves and the ocean at the same time. It's just happening. And if there are no tides, there is still ocean. And if there are tides, there is still ocean. There is no problem there. So the oneness is not contradicted in whichever the form it is expressed. Where I can see some points of divergence between these two systems is, if we say, first of all, in the fusion of knowledge and action. Although in contemporary practices, so much so that when I stayed in monasteries and even my own teachers coming from Shankaraj orders practicing Tantra, I didn't see in real life these systems are viewed so much as a contradictory. But if we go to read actual Advaita texts, the fundamental debate is over Jnana Kriya Samuchaya, the fusion of action, the life of activities, active life, with pure knowledge. So the Advaita in the classical time rejected that, and that is what Kashmiri Shaivites thoroughly maintain, that the philosophy, and whether we can check in Abhinava or see in Ramakantha, so many other, even within Dvaita and Advaita, these ideas of integration, fusion of both is there. So the second point would be the stress on swatantra. Rather than finding the world stressing on illusion and all, this is more of a stress on absolute freedom of consciousness in its unfolding the diversity. So it does not, if the Brahman is pure consciousness, and if Advaita Vedanta had said Brahman is absolutely free in manifesting itself in whatever the way it likes, then that would have been very much Kashmiri Shaivism. So the only thing we differ is that absolute has that freedom. But if you are not free, what is the point of being? I got moksha, liberation, and what can you do? No, I just don't even exist. So what is the point? So if you are free, you can do something. So there's always action oriented. If you are free, then you can know everything you like. If you are free, oh, I don't want anything, what is the point of freedom then? If you are free, then all your desires are fulfilled, and that is the point. So this is how, anyway, Kashmiri Shaivites view, and then they consider this maybe in a process of creating a hierarchy of a parimita yogi and parimita yogi, that for the parimita yogi, that there is this seeking, the quest for transcending as quickly as possible, because they want this one singular experience. And then when the yogi transcends even that limitation, then he enters into the realm beyond limitation, and then his experience becomes aparimita, unbound, and that is where the diversity becomes his own expression, and he experiences the world as his own body. The entire existence becomes his spontaneous manifestation, and then
Dr.
he is
Timalsina?
both. Yes.
Oh,
I think my
okay.
time is running out, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, I'll catch up later. Okay, sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let me let's just break it down into like a layman terms, so that maybe the people who are new to this, Swami Sarvapriyananda. So from your understanding, then what is the difference in the philosophical structures between Advaita Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism? Let me start with, in the nature of consciousness itself. You've just talked about it is existence, but it is consciousness. Now, Dr. Timalsina is implying that consciousness also has will. Is this in Advaita Vedanta? Does consciousness also have will? Explain a little bit about the differences as you understand between the two.
Yes. That was, by the way, an amazing performance by Dr. Timalsina. I wouldn't have dared to try to summarize Kashmiri Shaivism in a few minutes. It's a vast and intricate system. All right. So a precise question about the nature of ultimate reality, the difference in the nature of ultimate reality from the Advaita perspective and from a Kashmiri Shaiva perspective, that can be easily pinpointed. From, as Professor Timalsina said, one need not go into Sat and Chit, differentiate between them. Let's just call it Prakasha, consciousness itself, because it's existence and it is consciousness. Now, according to Advaita Vedanta, the ultimate reality is Prakasha only, is existence consciousness, isness awareness. And according to Kashmiri Shaivism, it is Prakasha Vimarsha. So consciousness which is also aware of itself, sort of self-reflexively aware of itself. And from there, I think, if Professor Timalsina can correct me if I'm wrong, from there follows Jnana, Ichha and Kriya. So Jnana, Ichha, Kriya are further powers which follow from Vimarsha. Vimarsha Shakti is the fundamental thing. Advaita Vedanta at this point would say that what you are doing is you are importing the activities of the antakarana into the ultimate reality of the mind. So willing and knowing and desiring and activity, these are all something which originates in the mind, in the antakarana, in a mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankara. And this mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankara these are not cognate, these are not identical to consciousness. They are rather superimposed on consciousness. They are an appearance in consciousness. They do not constitute an equal reality with consciousness. They are not parts of consciousness. They are not apart from consciousness also. They are appearances, like a snake in a rope, like a reflection in a mirror. They are appearances. They do not exist by themselves in consciousness. So when Kashmiri Shaiva would say, fundamentally, the ultimate nature of reality is consciousness and a kind of self-reflexive self-awareness of consciousness, that Advaita Vedanta would object to, would say that you are bringing in something that belongs to the world of appearance into the world of reality. All right, so that's the core issue which differentiates. I'm reminded of Bradley, this very famous, I mean, I don't know if he's famous, but a wonderful British philosopher in the transition between the 19th and 20th century, who wrote this book, Appearance and Reality. He was asked that your conception of the absolute, is it a better conception of God? And then Bradley said, perhaps a better philosophy is not always a better religion. So something might be philosophically more cogent, more accurate, more logical, but in practice it may not form a more useful religion as such. Yeah.
So, Dr. Timalsina, so then according to Advaita Vedanta, the world is, as Swami Sarvapriyananda is saying, it's more an illusion. But according to the Shakti tradition, the Kashmir Shaivism, you're saying this world that we're experiencing is a manifestation of consciousness itself. It's a manifestation of Shiva. Is this world then is it the same reality that is consciousness itself? Is it just a is it real? According to Dvaita Vedanta, it's unreal. But in Kashmir Shaivism, do we consider this world, is there real? Is there levels of reality in Kashmir Shaivism?
Yes, Swamiji. Even in Kashmiri Shaivism, we do have the concept of abhasa. And the abhasavada, the doctrine of abhasa, is not to say that everything just the way it is, like if you see a snake on a rope is also real, But the idea is that for me to have the error of a snake, would a child who has never seen a snake have the same illusion? So there is some kind of imprint there, right? There is some kind of samskaras arising in the sense of seeing this world. So in the samskara form, where is that samskara form embedded within? If it is not in the consciousness, of course, the world as it is in the manifold may not be the way it appears. We can go to quantum level and reject this appearance. But even in the quantum level, for there something to be, for it to unfold in this particular structure, like for water to be fluid, for example, or fire to be burning, for example, they must have some quantum properties, and for that they lead it to appear in this particular distinctive way. So let us say this is not real, but I see, at least not me, what the Pratyabhijna philosopher saw a little problematic there is if we are to rely on rejection of something that appears in front of us, that let us say this is not real, then this non-reality becomes as one of the categories. There is something that is not real. From the absolute Advaita perspective, since every manifestation has some kind of extension, even if in a tiny form, even in its tiniest particle, like Vidyaranya in his Panchadasi has this Vishayananda, and he's also inspired by, he wrote Sri Vidyaranava Tantra, for example. He was one of the guys to integrate both the systems, Advaita Vedanta and Tantra. So even in Vishaya Ananda, there is this tiny bit of bliss we enjoy every day. When we say this is totally illusory, then all our modes of experiences, like when I'm conscious of things. When I say this is completely illusory, then I am used to understanding consciousness in terms of comprehending objects. When I'm enjoying something, and then when we say that all this is just illusion, then my experience of enjoyment becomes negated. We may go to that pure, pristine, absolute form that we have no idea about. Because all our everyday modes of consciousness, all our everyday modes of being, all our everyday modes of activities do not capture anything of that. But even more problematic would be if we say that whatever is existing is not real, that not real itself starts appearing as a category. And why is that absolute manifesting into the manifold? Because it doesn't have any ichha, it doesn't have any region, the Brahman does not have any will, and therefore we can say, but it has never appeared. I mean, from the Advaita perspective, then therefore the world experiences whatever you are stuck to trying to say, why am I suffering, or why is this world then? The world never is then. There is no then, there is no time, there is no temporality. And then the only problem is that fails to explain our mundane, our worldly experiences. It doesn't fail to explain the absolute. It does not give us any satisfactory answer about this thing, the world where we are in, and our problems of being in the world, or little enjoyment we have while being in the world. It seeks to that absolute thing, and then is willing, just very much ready to give up all that we have. And then it would be like, what if we are jumping off a cliff to find something absolute and giving up what we have in everyday life? And the Kashmiri Shaivite or tantric effort is, come on, you can have this and you can have that too, and you can start from this. It's small, okay, but you have to look for something big, and you can gradually maybe able to go see that absolute. So yeah, I don't think there is any contradiction in the description of in of
Dr. Timalsina, we've lost you a little bit there. Hopefully, we'll get you back again. Swami Sarvapriyananda, would you like to respond to what Dr. Timalsina has said?
Good. Let me use this internet-created gap to jump in and make a few observations. So, what is, quite apart from philosophy or metaphysics, what is the use of this concept of the falsity of the world? What good is it in spiritual life? So, there are two ways of, or two uses, let us say, in spiritual life of understanding the falsity of the world. One is, of course, a practical use, which an Advaita will say that if only you regard the world as false, then only there will be vairagya, a dispassion for the world. As long as we chase sense objects as the end all and be all of life, no spirituality is possible. Neither bhakti is possible, nor Kashmir Shaivism, nor Advaita, no spirituality is possible. So a certain amount of dispassion, vairagya, is generated by the concept of mithyatva, understanding of mithyatva. That is one. But a deeper philosophical and spiritual point is made by the declaration of mithyatva, falsity of the world. Consider this. When we think that the oh, I'm getting a feedback here.
Dr. Timalsina?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Now, all right. So when we say that the snake is false, we are by mistake seeing a rope as a snake. When you say that a snake is false, it's actually a rope. When you say the snake is false, the meaning of that is right there is the reality. Where is the real rope? Right where you are seeing the snake. If it was a real snake and you say that there is a rope, then you'll start searching for some other rope. You must negate that snake to find the rope. You must know that it is not a snake. It is actually a rope. Right there, what I thought was a snake is a rope. So when you say world is an appearance, Jagat Mithya, the world is false, what you are saying is right there in your experience, What you are experiencing is the world. There itself you investigate, you will find the ultimate reality. The teaching of Jagat Mithyatva is a pointer to the underlying reality. There can be no falsity without an underlying truth. So there can be no false snake in vacuum. There's a false snake means that there is a real rope. There is no mirage water without the actual desert underlying it. Similarly, when you say Jagat Mithya, you're not saying that there is some other truth. The truth is right there. What you are seeing as the false world is in not when we get enlightened, when we see the truth, you see right there and then in our experience that itself is Brahman. So the teaching of Jagat Mithyatva is a pointer to the reality of Brahman. That is a wonderful insight. So it is not something actually very abstract, unknown, far away. Shankaracharya in his introduction to the Mandukya Karika Bhashya, in the Agama Prakarana introduction, he says the only way to realize this truth of Turiya is to negate the Dvaita Prapancha. The appearance of duality has to be negated, because there itself you will find the Turiya. It is the Turiya itself which is appearing as the waker and the waker's world, the dreamer and the dreamer's world, and the deep sleeper and the deep sleep potential darkness, the Bijavastha. So that was my point. The falsity of the world is a very useful doctrine. It is actually pointing to the underlying reality.
Thank you, Swamiji. As time is running out, I want to do a little bit into the practices now. So I'd like to get into the practices of basically Advaita Vedanta, and you were talking about Kashmir. So let's just begin, Dr. Timalsina. Just in 5 minutes, just maybe give what are some of the basic practices, as you were talking about, that is done in this Kashmir Shaivism?
So the easiest practice is from all the agamas perspective, when people go to temple, for example, worship an image, people recite mantras, people chant the names of the deities, of whatever the deities they like to worship, and they meditate, they contemplate upon the images of the deities or relate to their meaning. They do physical exercises, they do breathing practices. Every aspect, every mode is incorporated within what we say tantric practice. So therefore, I cannot say these are what the tantric practice is, but I can group into three. I pointed out a little bit earlier that there are these upayas: Shambhava upaya, Shakta upaya, and Adaba upaya. Akinchit chintakasaiva guruna pratibodataha jayate yaha samavesa sambhavo sabudarita. So the Sambhava upaya is when you are not thinking of anything. So that state of being free from thoughts, being free from vikalpas, constructions, mental constructions, imagination, fantasy. At that time, when the instruction occurs, or when there is the Shaktipat, the emission of power, potency by Lord Shiva himself, the grace, the divine grace, or the grace of the teacher, aha moment, a satori, it's just instantaneous experience without any thinking, without any doing, that would be Shambhava upaya. Uchara rahitam vastu chetasaiva vichintayan yam samavesham apnoti shaktah sotra vidiyate. So when we have uchara rahitam vastu, so the entity, the object, like let's say a thought that cannot be articulated, but can only be thought through, chetasa eva, only the mind can be actively engaged on. And what that leads to, the type of samavesa, entry into the esoteric experience that we are calling Shakta Upaya, which is also a gradual process of refining thoughts from pure externalization to inner modes, and even transcending the inner modes to the absolute. And then the Adaba Upaya would be Uchara, Karana, Dhyana, Varna, Sthana, Prakalpanaihi. So there is the articulation of mantras, Karana, different bodily gestures and locations, different centers of Kundalini, like chakras, for example, and then a visualization of colors, this and that, and the location within. So, or outside, any external practices and breathing exercises. So these all fall under the Anava Upaya. So instead of saying this is the Upaya, I would say that it's the whole Shastra is it's a bundle of upayas. So we can investigate another 1,000 new yoga methods if we were to read these Agama Shastras. So the more focus there is not about describing the truth, but about experiencing how to go. This is a Upaya Shastra. Thank you.
Thank you. Swami Sarvapriyananda, what are the practices in Advaita Vedanta?
Yes. Again, I have an easier job. I think it was when you said 5 minutes to Professor Timalsina talk about Upaya, I thought it was so unfair. Because when you talk about Upayas in Kashmir Shaivism, it's an ocean. Just the Vijnana Bhairava has 112 dharanas, techniques of meditation. So yes, I like that phrase. It's an Upaya Shastra, a wealth of techniques. Whereas in Advaita Vedanta, the problem is simple, that we are actually right now at this moment the absolute reality. You are Brahman. Our reaction would be, but I don't know it, I don't see it, I don't feel it. What do you mean? So we do not know our real nature as Brahman. That's the problem. Ignorance, ajnana, and the solution to any kind of ignorance is always knowledge, jnana. So the practice would be to generate the jnana, the realization that I am Brahman, the aham brahmasmi, the brahmakara vritti. What is the practice for that? The practice for generating this awakening knowledge, brahma jnana. The practice would be shravana manana nididhyasana. There are these texts which convey the highest truth. We have to study them. This is shravana. Shravana literally means hearing them, but you have to study them systematically, investigate them. The first stage of the practice, this hearing or studying, is complete when you know what the teaching is. When I know the basic teachings of the Upanishads are now clear to me. Now, this is what the Upanishad says. This is what Vedanta says. Now, I may have doubts about the teachings. I may have many kinds of objections. So those are taken care of in the second stage, which is manana. Manana means cogitation, reflection, dwelling on it with using reason, raising various kinds of objections, not only from yourself, but from rival schools, different philosophical points of view. Today, from a materialistic, reductive, scientific point of view, raise those objections, clarify, answer those objections to your satisfaction. The teacher will help you, the texts help you. There is a vast dialectical tradition, of which our Professor Timalsina himself is a master of, in Advaita Vedanta, the dialectical tradition. The manana is complete. The second stage, manana, is complete when you can say, I not only know the teachings, but now I'm convinced. I get it. I know it now and I get it. Then what remains? There still is this feeling that I get it, it's very clear, I have conviction, but my contrary tendencies are still there. I tend to, when I'm faced with a toothache, for example, I tend to behave like a jiva, that I am suffering. I react in suffering to unpleasant things. I react with desire for pleasant things. So life is still going on the way it was before knowledge. These are called contrary tendencies. Still behaving like a body mind, still reacting to life like a body mind. So how to manifest this knowledge that I am Brahman? This is done through nididhyasana or Vedantic meditation, and for which there are many techniques. Dridrishya Viveka gives 6 techniques, Aparoksha Anubhuti gives 15, and so on. So this is Shravana Manana Nididhyasana, systematically studying the text, reasoning upon it, and then meditating upon it till you get you assimilate it. But I must mention here, when we enter Advaita Vedanta, they impose some entry-level conditions. Sadhan Chatushtai, Viveka, Vairagya, the 6-fold treasures, and the Mumukshutva, intense desire to be free, the discernment between the real and the unreal, dispassion for the transient, and disciplines of body and mind. All those qualities of a aspirant, of a seeker, they are supposed to be already generated by previous practices. What are the previous practices? Upasana, worship, which will give you chitta ekagrata, focus of mind. And even before that, karma, action, which will give you purity of mind, chitta shuddhi. So with a purified mind, with a concentrated mind, you come to Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, and the result will be the arising of the Brahma Jnana or Brahmakara Vritti, which will remove the ignorance. You will realize you are Brahman, and you will realize you are free, you always were, and you continue to be free. I'll just point out that Advaita Vedanta is actually firmly set in the Vedic system. So they're taking for granted a Vedic lifestyle. So a lot of practices which are not directly mentioned in Advaita Vedanta, they're taking for granted that you have done Vedic ritualistic action, you have a purified mind, you have done Upasana, you have a concentrated mind, and then you enter into Advaitic practices.
Thank you, Swamiji. Dr. Timalsina, two questions come to mind. First, who or what is Ishvara in Kashmir Shaivism? Because if it is Shiva Shakti that through its own power is reducing itself to this jiva that's experiencing the world, where is the role of Ishvara as we know in Advaita Vedanta? And second, what is then the role of grace? Who are you praying to if Ishvara? So explain this concept of Ishvara and grace within the Kashmir Shaivism system.
So Ishvara is a kind of technical category there in Kashmiri Shaivism, and it can be confusing because at times we are using Ishvara for Parameshwara, the absolute Shiva, and but the Ishvara in the system is there is this absolute category of Shiva, and then Abhinabhava, so never separable is Shakti. And then when there is some sense of difference, Veda Udaya, there is this slight rise of Ishan-Unmesh, like a slightly difference emerges, that is called Sadasiva. And there is this equal state of being outside and being inside. And then comes Ishvara as a lower category, below Shiva, Shakti, and Sadasiva. And there comes this Ishvara as a category, wherein there is this I-am-ness that permeates the world, but he has that Ishvara as a category, has also the consciousness of idam, this as outside of me. So that is where this governing capacity of the will Isitrita comes. So and then and where does this grace come from? The grace comes from the same Shiva, because it is not like at one time the grace comes and then other time grace does not come. Grace is constantly, without being any temporal limitation, grace is constantly coming there. But then that grace is not captured without having some chitta shuddhi, if we say in other terminology, like the proper purification to grasp, receive the grace of Lord Shiva. So the grace of Lord Shiva is not temporal, it's not finite, it's infinite. It's just like the sunlight, constantly coming, and sometimes we get the light, other times we do not. Am I out?
What's the role of grace in Advaita Vedanta?
There's a question for me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So what is the role of grace in Advaita Vedanta?
Well, I think the first line of one of the most radical texts of non-dualism of Advaita Vedanta, the Avadhuta Gita, Ishvara anugraha deva pumsam advaita vasana. It's only by the grace of God, by Ishvara's grace, that a person gets a desire for Advaita Vedanta. So if you've got a desire, if you have an interest in Advaita Vedanta, you already have the grace of God. Sri Ramakrishna used to say the grace of God is like the wind which is always blowing. You have to raise the sail. So in Advaita Vedanta, the grace of God is there. That's why only we have become interested in Advaita Vedanta. Now the whole thing is to go ahead with our inquiry, with the self-inquiry. In fact, Upanishads, they themselves say, Yamaivesha Prinute Tenaisha Atma Tanum Swam. So whoever the Atman chooses, to that it reveals itself. And Shankaracharya there interprets that it seems to be an occasion to talk about grace, but Shankaracharya there in his commentary he says, whom does the Atma choose to reveal itself? The one who chooses the Atma. So I think he is taking the side of effort, self-effort, rather than talk about grace at that occasion. In fact, there is a whole book, big volume, The Role of Grace in Shankara's Vedanta, which was published recently by an American professor in Boston, I think. So wherever Shankaracharya has talked about grace, that has been put together in that volume. Yeah.
And Dr. Timalsina, you have not yet mentioned Divine Mother. You've talked about Shiva consciousness, but where's Divine Mother lie in this philosophy? I know you're a worshiper of Mother Kali, so where's the role of Divine Mother here?
Oh, she has to be kept hidden. She doesn't like to be talked about. So I'm just kidding. She doesn't mind. So it's the Chiti, pure consciousness. It's just another name is Kali, because it is the consciousness itself. Kshepo Gyanam cha Sankhyanam Gatirnada Itikramat Kalanam Kurvati Kali Karshini Tyavidiyate, because Swatmanah Bhedanam Kshepa. It is the very pure consciousness that has self-differentiating capacity, power, Shakti to differentiate within itself, to become many. And that is because of Kshepa. So this is Kala Kila Bila Kshepe, from the verbal root Kal, we have Kali, because she who constitutes difference without actually being many. Jnanam, Jnanamcha, so she who cognizes as manifold without actually even being different. So that is why Kala Jnane, there is the root Kala. From the root Kala Jnane, the dhatu, in Sanskrit, all the words, name words are coming from the verbal base. So this is what makes it possible for us to cognize diversity without consciousness being different. That same consciousness constitutes difference in concepts, and that is the task of Kali. That is where Kali comes. Sankhyanam, we have the analytical power to determine, we ascertain things, and that Sankhyana is also one of the meanings of the word Kali. Gati, dynamism, motion. So the entire world is buzzing, everything, not just sentient. There's the sentient beings have the sentience as dynamic, and then even the non-sentient entities have some energies, motion, everything is dynamic. That dynamism itself comes from gati, kala gatau. So the verbal root is kala. From that we get Kali. Nada, the shabde, kala shabde. So from all the articulations, like we are speaking right now, this articulation would not have been possible without Kali. This is Kali expressing herself. So these words are not just Kali speaking. This is Kali being spoken to. It is the Kali speaking, Kali herself. That is where Kali comes.
Thank you, Dr. Timalsina. Swami Sarvapriyananda, then why, in what you've been talking about, why did Shankaracharya introduce Divine Mother worship in the Advaita Vedanta tradition?
In the practice, yes, but you will notice that it is actually not there in any of the fundamental texts of Advaita Vedanta, in the Bhashyas or the Prakaranas. Though in the tradition, in the Shankara Mata tradition, there's an esoteric practice of the worship of the Divine Mother. The reason for that is, Holy Mother, Ma Sharada, once sent a question to Swami Brahmananda, that ask Rakhal, Swami Brahmananda, why should one worship a Divine Mother? What is the purpose? The idea being, you are a monk and your aim is Brahma Jnana, the realization of Brahman. So what is the need for it? Seems like an extra. Why do you worship the Divine Mother? What is the point? Why don't you just do what Advaita Vedanta says, do Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana and realize you are Brahman, finished. Of course, she did not say all those things. She simply ask Rakhal why one has to worship the Divine Mother. And Swami Brahmananda replied, because the keys to Brahma Jnana are in the hands of the Divine Mother. Brahma Jnana chabi kati, Mayer hate. The keys to Brahma Jnana in the hands of the Divine Mother. The reason for the worship of the Divine Mother in the Shankara tradition is not a philosophical reason. It is more of a practical upayic reason.
Thank you, Swamiji. And I'd like to now go into the experiences. So if we do these practices, what are the experiences we can hope to achieve through these systems? So I'd like to begin with Dr. Timalsina. So what are the different types of experiences that one experiences in the practice of Kashmir Shaivism Tantra?
One of the best texts my teacher, my guru, and my guru's guru liked very much is Virupaksha Panchashika. It's just a very small book, 50 stanzas of Virupaksha. And the text begins with the Vimati Pada Manga Sarvam Drishyatva Chariramidam. So let me not go into Sanskrit, that the idea is that everything in the world that I can see, feel, touch is my own body. So this says Virupaksha is sharing his personal experience of having the entire world as his own physical experience, just the way I can move my fingers. He says that I can move the mountains the same way. Basically, I don't feel the difference between this corporeality and that corporeality, the corporeality down in the form of the rocks and the plants and the rivers and everything. So this is one experience I find wherein the Vishwa Mayata, being immanent, universal, comes. And then the second is of Vishwa Uttirnata, transcending the difference, transcending duality, and not even the expression of the manifold in its most pristine form, in its non-dual oneness, singularity of consciousness, bliss only, to be there without expression of any form, without expression of any name, without words. So this is what generally the Advaita type experience, I could say. So Vishwa Uttirnata, to transcend to the absolute and be there. So Vishwa Uttirna and Vishwa Maya. So, and then the third category in a Pratyavijna is, why would we want to either or? And then they introduced a category of Bhairava. So the image of Bhairava is like Bhairava has generally the type of Bhairavas I am familiar with. Just a big eyes wide open. And then they are in this absolute serene state while engaging in the world. So the concept is you are fully enjoying the world, apparently. Also in that same pristine non-dual state of experience. But are all these experiences the beginning steps? Not really, because I wanted to start from the top to the bottom. So even the pulsation of Kundalini, like a simple feel of the surge of Kundalini, and small states of Samavesa, wherein sadhaka starts experiencing himself as the mother, and we can hear these stories from no other but Swami Ramakrishna himself, not having any sense of difference between himself and the divine mother he is worshipping. So these are the beginning stages actually of experiencing, and there are many more. I'm sure he went through all of these, but not necessarily came to our conversations. So these many of these experiences can be felt, at least from the tantric perspective, by simply means of pranayama, like the breathing exercises combined with visualization, different images. But there are some practices that are absolutely conducive to highest goal, and there are some other practices that may only lead to some kind of small gimmick achievements, and people sadhakas can be misguided. And so therefore, although Tantra has a vast array of practices, but Tantras repeatedly say, do not do this without your mentor. So, like random picking in Google, I found this Vijnana Bhairava, so let me kind of sort of try on it. At least from the perspective of the parampara, tradition and the text, this is strictly forbidden, because things might not always go right, and people might get carried away, because the flaws, actually, I was worried if Swamiji will start bringing those things. Yeah, there are many disturbing things also in Tantra. People might take that as the real core practice, so the Tantra can be both. It can be blessing, and it can also be a hindrance for the people who are not well qualified for.
Thank you, Dr. Timalsina. Swami Sarvapriyananda, what are the experiences that one can achieve in the Advaita Vedantic system?
If you want to go to the heart of that question, it's a difficult question to answer, because it's like asking, seeing what is an experience of seeing? Seeing anything is an experience of seeing. Similarly, Advaita Vedanta is actually not a path of experiences. That might sound very strange. There is the path of experiences. See, I make a broad classification. There is the path of belief, which is a kind of dualistic devotional faith. Depend on God, and then God will take care of everything. That is kind of religion people understand. Then there comes the path of mystical experiences. Patanjali Yoga, for example, a part of Kashmiri Shaivism, for example, tantric practices, a variety of extraordinary, emphasis is on extraordinary, the variety of extraordinary experiences which will prove to you the truth of spirituality. As Swami Vivekananda himself said, if there is God, I must see God. He goes to Sri Ramakrishna and says, can I see God? If I have an immortal soul, I must feel it. So religion is realization in the sense of mystical experience, extraordinary experience. That's the second path. But Advaita at its core is not even that. Advaita is not about getting new experience. It's not about believing in something. It's not about getting new or extraordinary experiences. It's about seeing the reality which makes all experiences possible. Ordinary experience, extraordinary experience. Worldly experience, mystical experience. Secular experience, spiritual experience. All kinds of experiences. What is behind all of that? That consciousness you are. I am that consciousness. This knowledge is Advaita. Then what happens? Is there no experiential correlate? There is. At the end, what will happen is, Kena Upanishad says, Pratibodha viditam matam amritatvam hi vindate. That in every bodha, bodham prati, in every experience, in seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, in walking, talking, in waking, dreaming, deep sleep, every experience, Brahman is experienced. Not that it is a new kind of experience. In seeing every golden ornament, gold is experienced. Shankaracharya in Aparoksha Anubhuti says, when you see a clay pot, when you see the pot, the clay blazes forth. He uses that language, it blazes forth choicelessly. So for an enlightened person who has got Advaitic enlightenment, realization, I am Brahman, in every experience, Brahman is revealed. Because of knowledge, not because of particular mystical experiences. Yes. Am I audible? Yes.
Yes. So would you say then, are you experiencing every experience you're experiencing as consciousness? So when you're seeing whatever you're seeing, is it experienced as Brahman itself? What do you
When you look at a golden necklace, is it experienced as gold itself? You see, yes. And do you see the necklace or not? Of course, you see it, yes. You see the truth as it is. That's the way to put it. Yeah.
Dr. Timalsina, do you have anything? Would you like to anything to add to that?
Can I?
So
Yeah.
I would,
Yes.
Huh? Okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Just one verse at the end from Abhinava Gupta. Tava chaka kila na stutirambike sakala shabdamayi kila te tanu Nikhila murtishu me bhavadannvayo manasi jasu bahihi prasarasu cha. Iti vichintya shive samita shive jagati jatamayat navasadidam stuti japarchana chintana varjita nakhalu kachana kala kalastime. So just a brief translation. Tavachaka kilana stutiram became mother. What can be your prayer? What can I say for your prayer? Because why can't you pray me? Sakala shabda mai kilate tanu, your body is comprised of all the words. Nikhila murti sume bhavadanvayo, in every single form or structure I see you. Manasi jasu bahi prasarasu cha, whether these forms are coming in my mind, fantasy, memory, or outside in the world. Iti vichintya shive samita, oh auspicious mother, thinking like this, jagati jata mayatna vasadidam, whatever this is, without any effort, whatever I have gotten in the life, in the world. Stuti japarchana chintana varjita, that is devoid of your stuti, your japa, your archana, worshipping you, chanting your name. Nakhalu kachana kala kalastime. I have not spent a single moment of my life without praying you, because everything I do, everything I think, everything I speak is just your prayers. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just
Yes.
reminded of. Let's make a couple of comments here. One question to Professor Timalsina is that I have noticed traditional Advaitic teachers, monks. I'll give two examples whom I have seen. One is, of course, whom I personally seen, Ramananda Saraswati, and before that, Akhandananda Saraswati, whom I did not see. It was before my time. Now, they are traditional Advaitic teachers, monks, and with a great fascination and interest for Kashmiri Shaivism. They not only studied it, they practiced it also, and they taught it also. There are classes on Vijnana Bhairava, Spandakarika, Shiva Sutras by Ramananda Saraswati. So my question is: so how do you account for it? What does it mean? What does it signify? Is it that they are all? I think you probably will agree immediately that both of this Advaita Vedanta and Kashmiri Shaivism are fully aligned. There is really no fundamental problem or clash between the two.
One of my Diksha gurus is Shankara Chaitanya Bharati. And this is the story of bringing Sharda Math to Benares when the Matha had to move. And in the Lalita Ghat, you will find a small abode where Shankara Chaitanya Bharati used to live, and the Matha is already there. We have this Lalita Upasaka from the Sarva-Amnaya order. And I have, of course, everybody likes to talk great many things about their teachers, but I do not think there existed anybody in our time who knew as much of Advaita as the first Shankara Chaitanya Bharati for his Darpana commentary on Khandana Khanda Khadya. Swamiji, you know, to write the best existing Sanskrit commentary in Khandana Khanda Khadya, and then also the authorship of Darshana Sarvasva, where he just critiques on the Swatantra Vada, but in his real life, every day, 10 hours of sadhana of Mataji. And that was such a strenuous training for us, for me to be qualified to be even remotely his disciple. I had to wait in line for 3-4 years after my acharya, all the classical educations. So there is a combination there I have seen in real life. And my another guru would have been Shankaracharya in Joshimath. He escaped. He didn't like that business of taking all these mathas, and instead of Vidyaranya, he just changed name to Murkharanya, and he stayed in Nepal and worshipped Mother Kali. He was a prominent Vedanta, of course, prominent Vedanta scholar, but he had contributed to editing some of the most esoteric Kali texts from our Krama system. So many of my gurus who taught me Kashmir Shaivism, Tantra Shastra are actually from the Matha order of Shankara. So if one sees that there is no coherence, let it be for their thinking, because all the ashramas have the centrality. All the 4 mathas worship Sri Yantra. So there are just different ways of some amnaic difference in the worship, but so that is where it comes. Basically, people who are trying to understand Vedanta from the books, Shankaracharya wrote this, therefore we have to understand that way, or the people who kind of sort of are part of parampara, part of the tradition, who have been into ashrams, who have actually lived in real ashrams, and they will get into this diversity. And I don't think that for us, what about the philosophical differences? Simple, this question I have asked to Swamiji Shankara Chaitanya, and he said that our job of Shastra is fun, of just doing Shastras. So we are trained to be Vachaspati Mishra. We don't have loyalty to one idea. We have loyalty to Shastra, and we want to continue thinking along the lines of Shastra. If I'm defending Trika system today, and tomorrow if I'm going to defend Advaita, somebody might say, oh my gosh, I can't rely that guy. It is their problem, not the problem of Pandits. We Pandits have the loyalty to Shastras alone.
Sarvatantra Swatantra. Sarvatantra Swatantra.
That is our dream to be, because then we are thinking through the perspective of, like Vachaspati Mishra, thinking through the perspective of a Yoga Sutra, and then thinking through the perspective of Shankara. So because these are, and you can see all of these culminates into a single system in Sri Vidyaranya Swami, and we can see a clear integration of Tantra and Advaita Vedanta, at least in the works of Vidyaranya Swami. Not just in, of course, Sri Vidyaranya, a voluminous Tantra, but even in Panchadashi itself, we start seeing the glimpse of real passages coming from the agamas or studies of, and then of course in his Jivan Mukti Viveka he exploited extensively the Yoga Vasishta, and Yoga Vasishta has its deep history with Kashmir Shaivism. So a real fusion happened like 600 years ago. So the living traditions have a great fusion, but when we kind of sort of a top of the history from Parampara and then go to earliest book, and then how, and Shankara's Advaita is not the only Advaita in the world, so there are many models, and even Shankara may not have given only one model of Advaita, at least that is the way I have read. So Shankara was open-minded, exploring Advaita, of course very thoroughly Advaitic, but even sometimes he might have used different models of interpretation. Otherwise, how come in his own disciples generation and grand disciples generation we find these different types of prasthanas, and then there is a prasthana Veda. We see that there's a Pratibimba Vada and Padmapada, and then Vachaspati's different commentaries and so on.
The Vivarana and the Bhamati.
Yeah, Vimati Prasthana and Bhamati, exactly. Why would there be any differences? So,
and Sthaneshwar Acharya's own track again, another development. Just one, my personal, I've been thinking about this Kashmiri Shaivism in relation to Advaita Vedanta. I was just thinking, what exactly is going on in Kashmiri Shaivism, and I'll just say something that tell me if I'm on the right track. My inner feeling, sort of intuitive feeling, is if we phenomenologically track the spiritual experiences of sadhakas and ground it in a philosophy, you will get the Trika system or the Kashmiri Shaiva system. All kinds of spiritual experiences, and then unify it with a, give a philosophical foundation to it, you will get this system. Is this the right way to think about it?
Swamiji, you put it way better than I could, because I like it because it's an archive of experiences, and like when we are trying to develop a system, we can go through pure logic, or we can go through pure faith, just like you said, and then we can go sit in your experience. So no other system brought to prominence in the experience the logic itself, though, because Abhinavagupta, and we find in the Malini and other agamas itself, Tarko Yogangam Uttamam. The best part of yoga, the best limb of yoga is Tarka. Tarka, not just simple logic, a rational thinking, inquiry, analytical thinking. So without what they did is, while compiling and analyzing these experiences of thousands of sages over time, over places, they used rational inquiry to ground, and whatever could fit within the system, they assembled them. And there are many other experiences, I'm sure they were, and they didn't come within the system.
Right.
It's like today too, even in 20th century, what we are finding. But only one difference is not trying to minimize the 20th century experiences, but and great sages have not done that. One thing is, in the earlier times, these experiences were never things to brag about, and they were not trying to say this is my experience. You cannot find any hagiography in like a 7th century, like a autobiography of a yogi in the 20th century, for example. I don't believe these people in those times didn't have those experiences, and only all of a sudden people started having it. But it was not very much fashionable for the great yogis to talk about their personal experiences, and they were more interested in how to, based on these experiences, how to create a structure, how to systematize, and how to disseminate these. Not like I had this, so what? If you do not have it, then it is pointless. I'm the only one having it. So how to create a system so that you can have what I have? I think that is the way I see Tantra functioning in the real world.
Almost exactly the language of Swami Vivekananda. He says that if anybody tells you that I have had these experiences but you cannot, and you must follow me only and believe me only, do not believe such a person. But if somebody comes and says that I have these experiences and you can too, here are the ways to do it, then you can believe such a person.
Wow. Thank you so much. It's a lively discussion. We can go on listening for long time periods. I want to thank each one of you, Swami Sarvapriyananda ji and Dr. Timalsina ji. Thank you for this wonderful dialogue about exploring Kashmir Shaivism and Advaita Vedanta. And it's been a wonderful experience. So, Swamiji, if, as you know, if anybody wants to hear Swamiji has this. Go to the Vedanta. He's the Vedanta Society New York minister, and he has many lectures on YouTube. Dr. Timalsina, do you also give? Are you have lectures also? Do you teach classes that people can attend as well?
I have recently started a group, a Vimarsha Foundation, and I offered on Yoga Vasishta a series which I would like to, when I meet Swamiji, I would like to share them with you. And I intend to continue those discourses, so the teachings do not remain clogged inside my job. And I have a job, I'm teaching, but it has to go outside of these institutional limitations. And I think I'm starting there, and I seek the blessing of Swamiji and all the support I can get, so that the ideas, particularly of Kashmir Shaivism, can go out to the public.
If I may just intervene just for a few seconds, this is something that Professor Timalsina will not do by himself, so I'm going to do it. He has some extraordinary books, among which I would particularly recommend. There is this book, Consciousness in Indian Philosophy, which is a collection. It's the most advanced Advaitic dialectics. What is Mithyatva? What is consciousness? What is self-luminosity? What is the relationship between Advaita Vedanta and Yogacara Buddhism on consciousness itself? And all the arguments across over 1,000, over a millennia, all concisely put within a few pages. Very densely written book, extraordinary. I'm enjoying it. And many of you, those who are interested in Advaita Vedanta, have been asking me about Drishti Shrishti Vada. So Drishti Shrishti Vada is a rather radical school of Advaita Vedanta. I can think of nobody better than Professor Timalsina. He is, I think, maybe the world's leading expert on that. He even has a book on Drishti Shrishti Vada, which is seeing and appearance. I think we should really have a special session. I don't know, it may be a past interest of Dr. Timalsina. He may no longer be interested in this, but really there are so many people who have asked me about Drishti Shrishti Vada, And I always think we should get Professor Timalsina to give a talk on Drishti Shrishtipada. So yes, thank you.
Thank you,
I
Swami.
am I am really humbled, Swamiji. Thank you so much, and I'm a little embarrassed too. But Swamiji, it's not a past interest. I will be all my life. I'll be working in these two systems, and Advaita Vedanta always remains my beloved field, and I will be always willing to be there, happy to share whatever I can think of, or whatever. If there is nothing for me to think of, whatever the acharyas have already thought through on Drishti Srishti or any other streams of Advaita Vedanta. And I
Yes,
really appreciate it, and I'm humbled.
you are on record now, so I will take you up on that offer in the near future.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to request Swami Sarvapriyananda, can you end with the closing chant, please?
Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu.